visitors to Ebony Gorge never come a second time. Compared to other national parks, we're relatively small. We only have one campground, and there's less division of roles between rangers like there would be at somewhere like Yosemite. That being said, we still get a steady daily flow of guests. Families, climbers, college kids, couples, they stream past our entrance station with maps spread across the dashboard, bouncing with questions and eyes glued to the layers of sandstone strata in the canyon walls. When the exit lane fills up around dusk, they're considerably less energetic, but just as content, full of promises to return on their family trip next year. They never do. They don't post nature selfies on Instagram. They don't leave reviews or call about early reservations. Ebony Gorge doesn't exist online. There's no mention of it in the NPS directory, nor ratings for our hikes on all trails. And yet, as perplexing as it is why visitors stay away, that's not the question that tickles my mind as I undress at the end of a long day that gasps me to alertness seconds before I can fall asleep. To the outside world, Ebony Gorge doesn't exist. So how did they find us in the first place? If I thought our shared encounter with the Whitechapel would turn Lenore and I into besties, I would have been wrong. Luckily, I never did think that. Lenore was, well, Lenore, after all. We may have shared a few begrudging words of solidarity next to a fire, words fueled by the adrenaline of a near-death experience, but the next day she was her brooding, scowling self again. We hiked the 2 days to civilization in uncomfortable silence, and once we were back, she treated me just like before, ignoring me and forgetting I existed. At least to my face. The day after returning, the chief called me into her office. "You're up for rotation next." Rotation? The Doors? This Saturday night? Next quarter moon? Goodness, if you can't remember simple things, buy yourself a pocketbook from the visitor center. Not at our prices, I won't. She stared at me. I mean, right. Yes. I'll be there. She was stony throughout the whole interaction, but I understood the exchange for what it was. An olive branch. If Winona was putting me back in rotation for the Doors, that meant she was no longer planning to fire me, not soon anyways. I more than suspected Lenore had something to do with that. Things settled. I did my shifts at the permitting desk and helped clean up overgrown trails. I trained visitors on what to do during mountain lion sightings, and when my shift came to lock the doors, I completed my rounds without incident. Yes, the correct night this time. Even Winona and the veteran rangers stopped disappearing so often. Whatever harm I'd caused my first rotation seemed to be settling. I started noticing the other quirks of Ebony. Weeds would resurrect. One morning, I passed a patch of frail, dried thistles. That evening the stalks were green and strong. You would find odd coins in the sand, sometimes Mexican pesos or Chinese yuan, but more commonly coins I couldn't find matches to online, scribbled with illegible symbols. Occasionally, fake trails would even sprout up on the park map. Hangman S. Arch. I asked a coworker, pointing at a dashed line near the north entrance. I read the description. An easy 2.3-mile loop with stunning desert views, perfect for families with small children. Is this a new version of the brochure or something? He snatched it from me, scanned it, then tossed the whole stack of guides into the trash. Cover me, he called as he marched from the visitor center. Need to make sure nobody got fooled. When I asked him about it later, he just shrugged. Happens sometimes. That was the common sentiment. The other rangers noticed these things, but they didn't seem to mind. You'd think normal people would be foaming at the mouth for answers. That they'd be investigating in their off hours, or researching, or pounding at Winona's door with questions, except these weren't normal people. There was nothing wrong with them. They weren't dangerous or hermits, but the longer I worked at Ebony, the image of it all sharpened into focus. While Lenore was right, I wasn't a pushover under normal circumstances. I was a chronic people pleaser. With that came a certain understanding. I got people. Read them intuitively, and it wasn't long before I was sure my intuition was the truth. The other rangers didn't care about answers, because they were like me. Hiding. Unlike them, however, I was new, stupidly naive, and recklessly curious. I already know you're going to tell me no, I said as Winona and I were locking up the permit office, but I'm going to ask you about the park. No. Cool. Now that that's out of the way, really, no. Chief, this conversation is going to happen eventually. You don't strike me as the type to procrastinate. She finished locking the back entrance and sighed. Which was fair. I was being quite unreasonable. I can't give you what you want, she said. Tidbits and advice, sure want to hear encounters of the Whitechapel. Horror stories about what happens to people who touch the doors. You're annoying enough, I'm sure you could draw a few of those out of me, but that's not what you want, is it? You want the why behind it all. That I can't give you. You must have your own theories. Sure. But those are my own. My best advice. Keep yourself good and distracted. That advice was torture for me. I'd never been good at waiting for Christmas presents as a kid. I would hunt them down every year, remove the wrapping paper, then gently tape them closed. I would do the Sudoku puzzle in the Sunday paper each week, even if it took me hours, and even though I always hated Sudoku, because the alternative was incompletion. Uncertainty. Not knowing. I'd never been able to live with that. I attempted Winona's advice anyway. The other rangers were secretive, but they were also outdoor junkies like myself. You don't get into this job, even as an escape, without having achieved a certain level of granola, and joint granola, we did. They showed me the best bouldering routes, climbing ravines, and fishing holes. One girl in particular, another seasonal ranger named Heather, seemed particularly willing to show me around Ebony, an enthusiasm that made more sense on our first solo outing when she pushed me against a slot canyon wall and started kissing my neck. While I am good at reading people, romantic attraction is the exception. Not that there was necessarily anything romantic between Heather and I. From my understanding, this is pretty common in the NPS. You take a handful of single 20 to 30s, seclude them at the end of the world, then bump them right next to each other. One guess what happens next. It wasn't serious. We would make out occasionally, go climbing sometimes, grab food from the local burger place. Heather and I weren't dating, and neither of us wanted to be. That was obvious from the beginning. I should be transparent, she told me the first time we hung out in my housing unit. We were on the couch. My hand was tangled in her hair. I'm not looking for anything official. Me neither. I've been in enough serious relationships to know I never want another. I smiled sadly. Golden sunlight fell on us through the window. I was engaged once. That's not something I plan to do again. Good. We kept kissing. I did what Winona advised. I kept myself busy, moving, and distracted by a dozen silly things all until the morning I knocked on Heather's unit door and she didn't answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. She's gone, somebody called from behind. Lenore, I realized. This was one of the few times we talked since our backpacking trip. A repelling bag was slung over her shoulder. Gone where? Quit last night. Said she's leaving for good. She shrugged and kept walking. Odd.